I found it at 11:47 p.m., wedged between dusty law books in Nancy's mahogany study, a USB drive no bigger than my thumb, labeled in her careful handwriting, Winterhouse 3 a.m. Conf. My name is Meredith, and I've been living in this house for 6 years. Not as family, not as a guest, as the help who happened to share DNA with the man who once owned half of everything here. Meredith. Natalie's voice cut through the silence like broken glass. Where are the final headcount numbers? I slipped the USB into my pocket and grabbed the catering contracts from Nancy's desk. Tomorrow was Emma's Sweet 16, $75,000 of pure excess, and I'd planned every detail for free. Coming, I called back, walking toward the kitchen where Natalie stood surrounded by flower arrangements that cost more than most people's rent. She snatched the papers from my hands without looking up. The ice sculpture better be perfect. Emma only turns 16 once. It will be. I'd confirmed it 3 times today. And you remembered to press your black dress? The conservative one? Heat crawled up my neck. Yes. Good. We can't have you looking like you belong with the guests. 6 years ago, when my brother Harry died in that car accident, Natalie cried in my arms and begged me to help raise Emma. I can't do this alone, she'd sobbed. Harry always said you were the strongest person he knew. So I dropped out of my social work program, moved into their guest room, became Emma's everything while Natalie grieved, then dated, then remarried her grief into something that looked like happiness from the outside. Now Emma was upstairs, probably texting her friends about tomorrow's party. 16 years old and completely unaware that her trust fund had been redirected, her inheritance rerouted, and her aunt treated like hired help in what used to be her uncle's house. The DJ confirmed the playlist? Natalie asked, still not meeting my eyes. Yes, twice. And the photographer knows to focus on Emma and the family, not random guests? Not me, she meant. Never me. He knows. Natalie finally looked up, her perfectly contoured face showing the first crack of genuine emotion I'd seen in months. This has to be perfect, Meredith. Emma deserves perfect. For a moment, she almost sounded like the sister-in-law who used to include me in family photos, who used to introduce me as Harry's sister, the one who saved us all. It will be perfect, I said quietly. She nodded and turned back to her flowers. Dismissed. I walked upstairs to check on Emma. Her door was cracked open, and I could hear her on the phone with Morgan. I know it's going to be amazing, Emma was saying. Aunt Meredith planned everything. She always makes things special. My chest tightened. Emma still called me Aunt Meredith when her mother wasn't around, still hugged me goodnight, still asked for my advice about boys and college applications and whether she should cut her hair. She had no idea that, according to the will on file with the probate court, I didn't exist. That her father's final wishes had been edited to erase me completely. But I knew. I'd suspected something was wrong 3 years ago when I overheard Nancy and Natalie whispering about paperwork and keeping things simple. When I asked to see Harry's will, Natalie claimed the lawyer said family members couldn't request copies. That's when I started paying attention, started collecting small inconsistencies. Started remembering conversations with Harry about his plans for Emma's future, plans that included me as co-trustee of her inheritance, plans that apparently never made it to paper. I knocked softly on Emma's door. Hey, birthday girl. You should get some sleep. She opened the door, her face glowing with excitement. At 16, she looked so much like Harry it sometimes took my breath away. Same dark eyes, same stubborn chin, same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. I can't sleep, she said. I keep thinking about tomorrow. Mom's been so stressed about everything being perfect. It will be. I promise. She hugged me tight. Thank you for everything, Aunt Meredith. I know you worked so hard on this. You're worth it, I whispered into her hair. After she went to bed, I sat in my small room and stared at the USB drive. Whatever was on it, Nancy had hidden it carefully. Whatever was on it, she'd labeled it with a date and time like evidence. Like a confession. I plugged it into my laptop and hit play. 2 voices filled my headphones. Drunk voices, laughing voices. Natalie and Nancy recorded 3 years ago at 3 a.m., celebrating something they thought no one would ever discover. My hands shook as I listened to them destroy my brother's memory and my future in the same breath. But they'd made one mistake. They'd left the evidence where the nanny could find it. The morning of Emma's party, I arrived at the house at 6 a.m. wearing the black dress Natalie had specified. Conservative cut, long sleeves, nothing that would draw attention. The uniform of the invisible. "You're late," Nancy said as I walked through the back door. She stood in the kitchen wearing a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than I made in a month. "I'm actually 10 minutes early." "Early is on time. On time is late." She looked me up and down with obvious disapproval. "That dress will have to do, I suppose." The caterers arrived at 7, the florists at 8. By 9, the house had transformed into something from a magazine spread. White roses everywhere, crystal chandeliers sparkling, a chocolate fountain that belonged in a hotel lobby. Emma bounced down the stairs in her robe, eyes wide. "Oh my God, it's perfect." "Language, darling," Nancy said automatically. "It's beautiful, Aunt Meredith. Thank you." Emma threw her arms around me. "Emma." Natalie appeared in the doorway, already dressed in designer everything. "Go get ready. Hair and makeup are here." "Can Aunt Meredith come up with me?" "She has work to do down here." Emma's face fell slightly, but she nodded and headed upstairs. I watched her go, my heart clenching. "The ice sculpture looks smaller than I expected," Natalie said, examining the swan centerpiece. "It's exactly what you ordered." She moved to the gift table, adjusting ribbons that didn't need adjusting. "Did you remember to put the family gifts in front?" "Yes." "And you confirmed the photographer will get shots of Emma with her grandmother and me?" "Multiple times." She finally looked at me directly. "Good. This day needs to be perfect. Emma will remember this party for the rest of her life." The guests started arriving at 2. I stationed myself near the entrance, directing people to the gift table, the bar, the garden where Emma would make her entrance. I smiled and nodded and played the part of helpful staff. "Excuse me," a woman in pearls said, tapping my shoulder. "Could you get me another champagne?" "I'm not—" "Meredith handles the coordination." Natalie appeared beside us, her voice honey-sweet. "But I'm sure she can point you toward the bar." The woman looked confused. "Oh, I thought she was staff." "She helps out," Natalie said smoothly. I felt my face burn but said nothing. The woman wandered off, and Natalie leaned close to my ear. "Try to blend in better," she whispered. "You're making people uncomfortable." At 3 o'clock, Emma made her grand entrance in a white dress that made her look like a princess. The crowd applauded, cameras flashed. Nancy dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. I stood in the back, watching Emma glow under all the attention. She deserved this. She deserved to feel special and loved and celebrated. She also deserved to know the truth. "Beautiful party," someone said behind me. I turned to see Morgan's mother, Linda, holding a glass of wine. "Thank you. You planned all this yourself?" "I helped." "Don't be modest. Emma told Morgan you did everything. The flowers, the catering, the music. You have real talent." Before I could respond, Natalie appeared again. "Linda, so glad you could make it. Isn't Emma radiant?" "Absolutely, you must be so proud." "We are. It's been months of planning, but seeing her face makes it all worth it." Linda glanced at me, then back at Natalie. Meredith was just telling me how much work went into today. Oh yes, she's been very helpful with the smaller details. My hands clenched into fists. Smaller details. 6 months of my life reduced to smaller details. The afternoon wore on. Emma opened gifts, posed for photos, danced with her friends. I stayed busy, cleaning up spills, directing the caterers, making sure everything ran smoothly. At 5 o'clock, they brought out the cake. 3 tiers of white chocolate perfection with Emma's name in gold script. The crowd gathered around as Emma stood behind it, knife in hand. "Speech," someone called out. Emma blushed. "I just want to thank everyone for being here. This is the most amazing day of my life." "We love you, sweetheart," Natalie called out. "I love you too, Mom." "And Grandma Nancy," and Emma's eyes found mine in the crowd. "Aunt Meredith, who made all of this possible." A few people applauded. Nancy's smile tightened. Natalie's jaw clenched. That's when I walked to the DJ booth. "Excuse me," I said to the young man behind the equipment. "Yeah?" I pulled the USB from my pocket. "I need you to play this when she cuts the cake, instead of the music." He looked confused. "What is it?" "A surprise for the family." He shrugged and took the drive. "Sure thing." I walked back to my spot against the wall. Emma raised the knife above the cake. The crowd quieted, phones ready to capture the moment. "Make a wish, darling," Nancy called out. Emma closed her eyes, smiled, and brought the knife down. The DJ hit play. But instead of the happy birthday song, 2 familiar voices filled the garden through the sound system. Drunk voices, laughing voices, confessing voices. "She doesn't even suspect we rewrote it," Natalie's voice echoed across the silent crowd. The knife froze in Emma's hand as her mother's voice continued pouring from the speakers. "Meredith will die thinking she was never in it." Natalie's recorded laugh was sharp and cruel. "Harry's precious sister, cut out completely." Nancy's voice joined in, slurred but clear. The notary was so easy to convince. A few $1,000s and suddenly the original will went missing. Emma's face went white. The knife clattered to the table. "What is this?" someone in the crowd whispered. "Turn it off!" Natalie shrieked, pushing through the guests toward the DJ booth. "Turn it off right now!" But the recording kept playing. "The best part," Nancy continued on the audio, "is that little Emma will never know her father wanted Meredith as co-trustee. She'll grow up thinking we're her only family." "Stop it!" Emma's voice cracked across the garden. "Stop the music!" The DJ fumbled with his equipment, but I'd locked the file to play in full. 3 more minutes of drunken confessions echoed through the suddenly silent party. "Harry was such a fool," Natalie's voice continued, "leaving half his estate to his dropout sister, as if she deserved anything." Emma's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, staring at nothing. "This is fake." Natalie reached the DJ booth, yanking at cables. "Someone doctored this recording." "Mom?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, what are they talking about?" Morgan rushed to Emma's side. "Em, are you okay?" "The will," Emma said slowly. "They're talking about Daddy's will." "It's lies!" Nancy pushed through the crowd, her face red with rage. "Malicious lies from someone trying to destroy our family." But the recording wasn't finished. "At least we don't have to pretend to be grateful anymore," Natalie's voice said. "Let her play Nanny. Let her think she's family. She'll never see a penny." "And Emma?" Nancy asked on the recording. "Emma adores her. It's actually perfect. Free childcare from someone who thinks she's doing it out of love." The sound of clinking glasses came through the speakers, followed by more laughter. Emma stood up slowly, her white dress pristine against the chaos around her. "Is it true?" "Sweetheart," Natalie started. "Is it true?" Emma's screams silenced the entire garden. Phones were out now, people filming, whispering. A few guests had already started leaving, hurrying toward the parking area. "Emma, let me explain," Natalie said, her voice shaking. "Explain what? That you stole from Aunt Meredith? That you lied about Daddy's will?" "We didn't steal anything. We protected what was rightfully yours." "By cutting out the person who raised me?" Emma's voice broke. "The person who gave up everything for me?" I stood against the wall, watching my niece's world crumble. Part of me wanted to go to her, to comfort her like I had 1,000 times before, but she needed to hear this. She needed to know. Where is she? Emma spun around, searching the crowd. "Where's Aunt Meredith?" Our eyes met across the garden. Emma's face was streaked with tears, her carefully styled hair falling loose. "You knew," she said, walking toward me. "You knew they did this?" "Yes." "How long?" "I suspected for 3 years. I've been certain for 12 hours. Emma stopped in front of me, her hands shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were 13. Because you needed stability. Because I wasn't sure I could prove it." "But you can now?" "Yes." Natalie appeared beside us, mascara running down her cheeks. "Emma, please. Let's go inside and talk about this privately." "Privately?" Emma whirled on her mother. "Like you and Grandma talked privately about stealing from the person who loves me most?" "We didn't steal." "You forged Daddy's will." Emma's voice carried across the garden, reaching the remaining guests. "You cut out Aunt Meredith and lied about it for years." "We protected you," Nancy said, finally reaching us, "from someone who would have taken advantage of your grief." "Taken advantage?" Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She dropped out of college for me." "She sleeps in a guest room in her own brother's house. She planned this entire party for free because you told her it was her job as family." "Emma, calm down," Natalie pleaded. "Don't tell me to calm down. Don't you dare." Emma turned back to me. "What are you going to do?" I looked at my niece, this brave girl who'd just learned that her entire life was built on lies. "I'm going to court." "Good." Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I want to testify." "Sweetheart, no." Natalie reached for Emma's arm. Emma jerked away. "Don't touch me." The recording finally ended, leaving the garden in heavy silence. Most of the guests had fled. The ones remaining stood frozen, unsure whether to leave or stay. I pulled out my phone and dialed Adam's number. "It's done," I said when he answered. "File the papers." "Are you sure about this, Meredith?" "Once we start, there's no going back." I looked at Emma, standing alone in her white dress, surrounded by the ruins of her perfect party, at Natalie, crying into her hands, at Nancy, already calculating her next move. "I'm sure." I hung up and walked toward the back gate, leaving the party behind. "Aunt Meredith, wait," Emma called after me. I turned around. "Can I come with you?" "Yes," I said. "You can always come with me." 3 years earlier, I'd been folding Emma's laundry when I heard them in the kitchen below. Natalie and Nancy, voices low but not low enough. "The notary said it would be simple," Nancy was saying. "A few missing pages, a signature that looks close enough." "What if someone asks questions?" "Who's going to ask? Meredith trusts us completely." I'd frozen on the stairs, a stack of Emma's school uniforms in my arms. They were talking about paperwork, but something in their tone made my stomach clench. "Harry specifically mentioned her in the original," Natalie continued. "Co-trustee of Emma's inheritance, plus that ridiculous amount for her education fund. Your husband was too generous for his own good. Meredith dropped out of college. What does she need with education money? She dropped out to help us." "Exactly," She made her choice. I'd crept back upstairs that night, but the seed was planted. Over the following months, I started paying attention, started asking questions. Can I see a copy of Harry's will? I'd asked Natalie 6 months later. Why would you need that? Just curious about Emma's trust fund. When she turns 18, I want to make sure I understand the terms. The lawyer handles all that. No need for you to worry about it. But I did worry, so I started digging. That's how I ended up in Adam's law office 2 years ago, sitting across from the boy who used to help me with statistics homework in college. Meredith? Adam looked up from his computer, surprised. I haven't seen you since graduation. I need help with something legal, and I need someone I can trust. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. What's going on? I told him everything. The overheard conversation, Natalie's evasiveness about the will, the way Nancy looked at me like I was stealing food from their table every time I ate dinner with them. Do you have any documentation? Adam asked. That's the problem. They won't show me anything. Wills are public record once they're filed with probate court. I can request a copy. 3 days later, Adam called me back. Can you come in? I found something interesting. The will he showed me was 8 pages long, standard language about assets, trusts, and beneficiaries. Emma was the primary heir, with Natalie as trustee of her inheritance until she turned 25. I wasn't mentioned anywhere. This doesn't feel right, I said, scanning the pages again. Harry talked about setting up an education fund for me. He said he wanted to make sure I could finish my degree. People change their minds about wills all the time. Not Harry. He felt guilty that I dropped out to help with Emma. He promised he'd take care of my education. Adam leaned back in his chair. What exactly did he say? That Emma would be provided for, but so would I. That he was naming me as co-trustee because he trusted me to look out for her interests. Co-trustee? Yes, he said Natalie was too emotional to handle financial decisions alone. Adam pulled up something on his computer. The will I have shows Natalie as sole trustee. Then something's wrong. That's when Adam started making calls. To the law office that filed the will, to the notary who witnessed it, to the probate clerk who processed the paperwork. The original attorney retired, he told me a week later, but his assistant remembers your brother coming in multiple times to revise his will. Multiple times? She said he was very specific about including provisions for his sister's education and about naming 2 trustees for Emma's inheritance. So where's that version? That's what we need to find out. Adam spent months tracking down leads. The notary who witnessed the final will had moved to Florida and wasn't returning calls. The law office claimed their files from that period had been damaged in a flood, but Adam was persistent. I found something, he said, calling me at work 6 months ago. Can you meet me tonight? We met at a coffee shop downtown. Adam slid a folder across the table. I tracked down the paralegal who worked on your brother's file. She's retired now, but she kept copies of everything. Inside the folder was a different will. Same date, same signatures, but 3 additional pages. Pages that named me as co-trustee of Emma's inheritance. Pages that established a $50,000 education fund in my name. Pages that recognized my sacrifice and Harry's gratitude for everything I'd done for his family. This is it, I whispered, reading Harry's words. This is what he really wanted. The question is, how did the other version end up filed with the court? Nancy, I said immediately. She handled all the paperwork after Harry died. She said she was protecting Natalie from having to deal with legal details. We need proof that this version came first. How do we get that? Adam smiled grimly. We find the notary. and we make him tell us what really happened. It took 3 more months, but Adam finally tracked down Robert Martinez in Tampa, the man who'd notarized both versions of Harry's will. He's agreed to give a deposition, Adam told me over the phone. But Meredith, you need to know what he's going to say. Tell me. Nancy offered him $5,000 to lose the original will and notarize a replacement. He kept copies of both versions as insurance. Insurance? In case anyone ever asked questions? I sat in my car outside Emma's school, watching her laugh with her friends, completely unaware that her grandmother was a criminal and her mother was an accomplice. What do we do now? I asked Adam. We file a motion to reopen the estate. We present the original will and Martinez's testimony. We prove fraud. And then? Then we see if the truth is worth the war it's going to start. I looked at Emma again, 16 and innocent and trusting. It is, I said. The truth is always worth it. The morning after Emma's party, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Meredith, it's Adam. Have you seen the news? I stumbled to my laptop. The local news website had a video titled Sweet 16 Scandal, Audio Recording Exposes Will Fraud at Lavish Party. Someone had posted the entire recording online. The comment section was brutal. These people are disgusting. That poor girl finding out at her own party. The aunt is a saint for putting up with this for years. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You've destroyed this family. I hope you're proud. Then another. Emma will never forgive you for ruining her party. And another. Watch your back. Adam, they're sending me threatening messages. Screenshot everything. We'll need it for the restraining order. Restraining order? Meredith, this is about to get ugly. Nancy and Natalie aren't going to go down quietly. He was right. By noon, a black SUV was parked outside my apartment. Nancy sat in the passenger seat, staring at my building. I called Emma. Are you okay? I asked when she answered. No. Her voice was hoarse from crying. Mom keeps trying to explain, but everything she says makes it worse. Where are you? Morgan's house. I can't be around Mom right now. Do you want to stay with me for a while? Can I? Mom said you're trying to steal my inheritance. Emma, I'm trying to restore what your father actually wanted. There's a difference. I know. I'll be there in an hour. When Emma arrived, she looked exhausted. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. The whole school is talking about it, she said, dropping her bag by my door. Someone posted the video on TikTok. It has 2 million views. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I'm glad I know the truth. She sat on my couch, pulling her knees to her chest. Tell me about the real will. I showed her the copy Adam had found. Emma read every word, tears streaming down her face. He wanted you to help manage my trust fund, she said. Yes. And he left you money for college. $50,000. Mom and Grandma stole $50,000 from you? They stole more than money, Emma. They stole 6 years of my life. Emma's phone buzzed constantly. Text after text from Natalie. Please come home. We can work this out as a family. Don't let Meredith poison you against me. She's desperate, Emma said, showing me the messages. My phone rang. Natalie's name on the screen. Don't answer it, Emma said quickly, but I did. Meredith, please, we need to talk. There's nothing to discuss. Emma is my daughter. You can't just take her. I didn't take her. She chose to leave. Because you filled her head with lies. I played a recording of your own voice, Natalie. Your words, your confession. Silence on the other end. The court date is set for next month, I continued. You'll have plenty of chances to explain yourself then. You're destroying Emma's life for money. I'm fighting for what Harry wanted, what he trusted me to protect. Harry's dead. He doesn't get a vote anymore. Actually, he does. It's called a will, the real one. I hung up. That evening, Adam came over with a stack of legal documents. The motion to reopen the estate has been filed, he said, spreading papers across my kitchen table. Nancy and Natalie have 30 days to respond. What happens then? We go to court. We present the original will, Martinez's testimony, and the recording you found. Will it be enough? It should be, but they're going to fight dirty. He was right. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message typed in block letters. Drop the case or face the consequences. We're filing for a restraining order today, Adam said when I called him. Against who? It's not signed. Against Nancy and Natalie. This has their fingerprints all over it. That afternoon, Emma and I were grocery shopping when Natalie appeared in the cereal aisle. Emma, sweetheart, please come home. Emma stepped behind me. I don't want to talk to you. I'm your mother. We can work through this. You lied to me for years. I protected you. From what? From the person who actually loves me? Natalie's face crumpled. I love you. You love controlling me. There's a difference. Emma, please. No. Emma's voice was stronger now. I heard the recording, Mom. You and Grandma laughing about using Aunt Meredith as free childcare. Joking about how she'd never know what Daddy really wanted. We were drunk. We didn't mean... You meant every word. Natalie looked at me with pure hatred. This is your fault. You've turned my daughter against me. I didn't have to turn her against anything. I just showed her the truth. The truth? Natalie laughed bitterly. The truth is that Harry felt sorry for you. The truth is that you're a college dropout who couldn't make it on her own. Emma stepped forward. Stop talking to her like that. She's using you, Emma. Can't you see that? The only person who used anyone is you. Emma's voice was ice cold. You used Aunt Meredith's love for me to get free labor. You used Daddy's death to steal from both of us. Natalie started crying. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, Emma said. And now everyone knows what kind of person you really are. We left Natalie standing in the cereal aisle, sobbing into her hands. That night, Emma helped me cook dinner. We didn't talk about the case or the court date or her mother's tears. We talked about college applications and her plans for senior year and whether she wanted to keep taking piano lessons. Normal things, family things, the things we should have been talking about all along without the weight of lies between us. 2 weeks before the court date, I got a text from an unknown number. Can we meet? I have information you need. Kerry. Natalie's boyfriend of 2 years. The man who'd been living in Harry's house, sleeping in Harry's bed, playing stepfather to Emma while knowing exactly what Natalie and Nancy had done. It's probably a trap, Adam said when I showed him the message. Maybe, but what if it's not? We arranged to meet at a diner across town. Kerry was already there when I arrived, hunched over a cup of coffee in a back booth. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Thank you for coming, he said as I sat down. What do you want, Kerry? He pulled out his phone and set it on the table between us. I want to show you something. The screen displayed a voice memo dated 6 months ago. Kerry hit play. Natalie's voice filled the space between us. Emma's getting too close to Meredith. She's asking questions about the will again. Nancy's voice responded. Then we accelerate the timeline. What timeline? The boarding school in Switzerland. Send her there after her 16th birthday. Full custody transfer to you as stepfather once you and Natalie marry. And Meredith? Once Emma's gone, we don't need the nanny anymore. I stared at Kerry. You recorded this? I've been recording everything for months. He scrolled through dozens of audio files. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how wrong until I heard them planning to ship Emma overseas. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was scared. Carrie's hands shook as he picked up his coffee. Nancy threatened to destroy my business if I caused problems. She has connections everywhere. So why now? Because after Emma's party, I realized I couldn't live with myself if I stayed quiet. He looked up at me. That girl loves you more than anyone in the world, and they were going to take her away from you permanently. Carrie slid a flash drive across the table. Everything's on here. Conversations about the forged will, plans for Emma's boarding school, discussions about cutting you out completely once she turned 18. What else do they say? Nancy admits to bribing the notary. Natalie talks about burning the original will documents. There's even a conversation about framing you for theft if you ever got suspicious. My blood ran cold. Framing me? Nancy planted some of her jewelry in your room last month. She was going to discover it missing and call the police, but she didn't, because I found it and put it back. Carrie leaned forward. Meredith, these women are dangerous. They'll do anything to protect what they've stolen. Will you testify? Yes, but I need protection. Nancy's already threatening to ruin me financially. Adam can help with that. Carrie nodded. There's something else. About Emma's trust fund. What about it? They've been borrowing against it. Nancy's been using Emma's inheritance to fund her lifestyle for years. How much? Nearly $200,000. I felt sick. Emma doesn't know. Emma doesn't know any of it. They've been showing her fake statements. That evening, I sat Emma down and played one of Carrie's recordings. Her face went white as she listened to her mother and grandmother discussing her future like she was a piece of property. They were going to send me away? She whispered. Yes. To Switzerland? A boarding school there. Nancy said it would give them breathing room to handle the estate without your questions. Emma stood up abruptly and walked to the window. They stole my college fund too? Some of it. We'll get it back. How can you be sure? Because we have proof now, real proof. Emma turned around, tears streaming down her face. I feel so stupid. I actually believed Mom when she said she was protecting me. You're not stupid. You trusted the people who were supposed to love you. But you're the one who actually loves me. Yes, I do. Emma wiped her eyes. What happens at the court hearing? We present everything. The original will, the notary's testimony, Carrie's recordings. The judge will decide whether to restore the estate according to Harry's real wishes. And if we win, then you get your full inheritance back. I become co-trustee like Harry wanted. And Nancy and Natalie face criminal charges for fraud. Good. Emma's voice was steady now. I want them to face charges. The next morning, Adam called with news. Carrie's testimony is going to be devastating, he said, but there's a problem. What kind of problem? Nancy hired a team of lawyers, expensive ones. They're claiming the original will is a forgery and that you coerced Carrie into making false statements. That's ridiculous. I know. But they're also claiming you've been embezzling from Emma's trust fund. What? They filed a countersuit yesterday. They're saying you've been stealing money for years and that this whole case is an attempt to cover your tracks. I sank into a chair. Can they prove any of that? No, because it's not true, but it's going to make the hearing more complicated. How complicated? They're asking for a full financial audit of your accounts. And they want Emma placed in temporary custody with Nancy pending the outcome. Over my dead body. That's what I told them. But Meredith, this is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Emma, who was doing homework at my kitchen table. She looked up and smiled at me, the same smile Harry used to give me when we were kids. I'm prepared, I said. Good, because we're going to war. The courthouse was packed. News vans lined the street outside, and reporters pushed microphones toward anyone who looked like they might be involved in the case. "Stay close," Adam said as we walked up the steps. Emma held my hand tightly, her other arm linked through Kerry's. Inside, Natalie sat at the defendant's table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits. Nancy was beside her, wearing pearls and a black dress that probably cost more than my rent. She looked calm, composed, like she was attending a charity luncheon instead of a fraud hearing. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams. Judge Williams was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She'd reviewed all the evidence beforehand, according to Adam. "This is a petition to reopen the estate of Harry Wolff," she began. "The petitioner claims the will currently on file is fraudulent and that the true will was deliberately concealed." Nancy's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Davidson, stood up. "Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt by Ms. Wolff to steal from a grieving widow and her daughter. The will on file is legitimate, and we have evidence that Ms. Wolff has been embezzling from the estate for years." "We'll hear the evidence," Judge Williams said curtly. "Mr. Hunt, you may begin." Adam stood and walked to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor, we will prove that Nancy Evans and Natalie Knight conspired to forge Harry Wolff's will, cutting out his sister and stealing from his daughter's inheritance." He called Martinez, the notary, as his first witness. The man looked nervous as he took the oath. "Mr. Martinez, did you notarize 2 different versions of Harry Wolff's will?" "Yes, sir." "Can you tell us about the circumstances?" Martinez glanced at Nancy, then looked away quickly. "The first will was notarized in Mr. Wolff's presence in March 2018. The second one was brought to me by Mrs. Evans in April 2018 after Mr. Wolff had died." "And what did Mrs. Evans tell you about the second will?" "She said there had been a mistake in the first one. That Mr. Wolff had wanted to make changes but died before he could sign the corrected version." "Did you believe her?" Martinez shifted in his seat. "She offered me $5,000 to notarize the second will and destroy all records of the first one." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Nancy's face remained stone cold. "Did you take the money?" "Yes, I needed it for my daughter's medical bills." "But you kept copies of both wills?" "Yes." "As insurance." Adam presented both versions to the court. The differences were stark. In Harry's original will, I was named co-trustee of Emma's inheritance and recipient of a $50,000 education fund. In the forged version, I didn't exist. Davidson cross-examined Martinez aggressively, trying to paint him as unreliable, but the man's story never changed. Next, Adam called Kerry to the stand. "Mr. Kerry, how long have you been in a relationship with Natalie Knight?" 2 years. "During that time, did you overhear conversations between Ms. Knight and her mother about the will?" "Many times." Adam played several of Kerry's recordings. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Nancy and Natalie's voices filled the room, discussing their fraud in detail. "She doesn't even suspect we rewrote it," Natalie's voice said clearly. "The notary was so easy to convince," Nancy added with a laugh. Davidson objected repeatedly, claiming the recordings were obtained illegally, but Judge Williams allowed them as evidence. "Mr. Kerry," Adam continued, "did you hear discussions about Emma's trust fund?" "Yes. Nancy has been borrowing against it for years. Nearly $200,000. "For what purpose?" "Personal expenses. Vacations, jewelry, home renovations." When Davidson cross-examined Kerry, he tried to suggest Kerry was lying to get revenge on Natalie for their recent breakup. "Isn't it true you're angry that Ms. Knight ended your relationship?" "She didn't end it," Kerry said calmly. "I did." after I realized what kind of person she really is. Finally, Adam called me to the stand. Ms. Wolfe, why did you wait 3 years to challenge the will? Because I trusted them. Because I thought family meant something to them. What changed? I found the recording. I realized they'd been laughing about my pain for years. Davidson's cross-examination was brutal. He accused me of jealousy, of wanting Emma's inheritance for myself, of manipulating a grieving teenager. Isn't it true you've been planning this for years? He asked. No, I've been surviving this for years. You dropped out of college. You had no prospects. Suddenly your brother dies and leaves a fortune. Convenient, isn't it? My brother's death was the worst day of my life, but profitable. Adam objected, but the damage was done. Davidson was painting me as a gold digger. Then Emma asked to testify. Your Honor, she said, standing up in the gallery, I want to speak. Judge Williams looked surprised. You're a minor, Miss Knight. You don't have to testify. I want to. Emma walked to the witness stand with her head held high. She looked directly at her mother as she took the oath. Emma, Adam said gently, who raised you after your father died? Aunt Meredith. How do you feel about what you've learned in this courtroom? Emma's voice was steady and clear. I feel betrayed by my mother and grandmother, and grateful to Aunt Meredith for finally telling me the truth. Do you believe your aunt is trying to steal from you? No. I believe she's trying to give me back what my father wanted me to have. Davidson declined to cross-examine. Judge Williams called a brief recess. When she returned, her expression was grim. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, the original will, the notary's testimony, the audio recordings, and the financial records. The courtroom was silent. It's clear that fraud was committed. The will currently on file is not the document Harry Wolfe intended to govern his estate. Nancy's face finally cracked. I'm ordering the estate reopened according to the original will. Meredith Wolfe is hereby named co-trustee of Emma Knight's inheritance, and the $50,000 education fund is restored. Emma grabbed my hand and squeezed. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney for Criminal Prosecution of Nancy Evans and Natalie Knight for will tampering, fraud, and embezzlement. Natalie burst into tears. Nancy sat frozen, staring straight ahead. Court is adjourned. As we walked out, reporters swarmed us. Ms. Wolfe, how does it feel to win? I stopped on the courthouse steps and looked back at the building where justice had finally been served. Some things you don't win, I said. You survived them. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning while Emma and I were eating breakfast in my apartment. She'd been living with me since the trial ended, splitting time between my place and Morgan's family when she needed space to process everything. What is it? Emma asked, watching me stare at the official envelope. I don't know. I opened it carefully, expecting more legal paperwork. Instead, I found a property deed and a handwritten note from Harry's original lawyer. Ms. Wolfe, the note read, this was sealed with instructions to deliver only if the original will was ever restored. Your brother wanted you to have this, but he also wanted it to be a surprise. The deed was for a small lake house 2 hours north of the city. Harry's signature was at the bottom, dated just weeks before his death. Emma leaned over my shoulder to read. Dad bought you a house? Apparently. There's more. Emma pulled a folded paper from the envelope. Harry's handwriting covered both sides. Meredith, I read aloud, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong with my will. I'm sorry. I tried to protect you and Emma both, but I should have known Mom would try to interfere. Emma's eyes filled with tears. He knew Grandma would cause problems? I kept reading. The lake house is yours, no matter what happens to the rest of the estate. I bought it under a trust so no one could touch it. It's where we used to go fishing when we were kids. I thought maybe you'd want to take Emma there someday. Show her the good memories. I remember that place, Emma whispered. We went there when I was little. There's more, I said, continuing to read. I know you gave up everything for Emma. Your education, your dreams, your independence. I can never repay that sacrifice, but I hope this house gives you a place to start over. A place that's just yours. Emma was crying now. He really loved you. He loved both of us. The letter continued. If Emma is reading this too, I want her to know that Meredith is the strongest person I've ever known. She's not just your aunt, she's your guardian angel. Trust her. She'll never let you down. Emma wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Can we go see it? Right now? Right now. We drove north in Emma's car, following GPS directions through winding country roads. The house sat on a small hill overlooking the lake, exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits. White clapboard siding, green shutters, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs. It's perfect, Emma said as we walked up the front steps. The key was hidden under the same loose floorboard where Harry and I used to leave it 20 years ago. Inside, the house was clean and furnished simply. Someone had been maintaining it. Look, Emma called from the kitchen window. There's a dock. We walked down to the water together. The lake was calm, reflecting the afternoon sky like a mirror. Your dad taught me to fish from that dock, I said. Will you teach me? If you want to learn. Emma sat on the edge of the dock, dangling her feet in the water. Are you going to live here? I don't know. Maybe part-time. What about your degree? I can finish it online or transfer to the state school nearby. Emma nodded. I've been thinking about college applications. And I want to study social work, like you were going to. Emma, you don't have to. I want to help kids like me, kids whose families lie to them, kids who need someone to fight for them. I sat beside her on the dock. Your mom called me yesterday. Emma stiffened. What did she want? To apologize. And to ask if she could see you. What did you tell her? That it's your choice. It's always been your choice. Emma was quiet for a long time, watching the water lap against the dock posts. I'm not ready, she finally said. That's okay. Maybe someday, but not now. That's okay too. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun started to set over the lake. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Morgan, asking about weekend plans. Normal teenage concerns, normal teenage friendships. Aunt Meredith? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For not giving up. For fighting for the truth even when it hurt. You don't have to thank me for that. Yes, I do. Emma looked at me seriously. You could have walked away after Dad died. You could have let Mom and Grandma have everything and started your own life somewhere else. I would never have left you. I know. That's what makes you different from them? A loon called across the water, its voice echoing off the surrounding hills. Emma smiled at the sound. I think Dad would be happy, she said, knowing we're here together. I think so too. As darkness fell, we went back inside and found Harry's old photo albums in a closet. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, ordinary moments that felt precious now. Tell me about this one, Emma said, pointing to a photo of Harry and me as teenagers, grinning at the camera from this same dock. So I did. I told her about the summer Harry caught his first base, about the time we capsized our canoe trying to race across the lake, about the night we stayed up until dawn talking about our dreams for the future. Stories she'd never heard, memories she deserved to have. The truth, finally, without any lies mixed in. Outside, The lake was still and quiet under the stars. Inside, Emma fell asleep on the couch with her head on my shoulder, surrounded by pictures of the family that had always been hers. The family that would never lie to her again.
My name is Vivian Cross, and I've learned that time doesn't heal everything, it just gives you the composure to face it without flinching. The dining room was buzzing with laughter when I walked in a late arrival to my sister's anniversary dinner. Every seat was filled except one directly opposite hers. She leaned back in her chair, wine glass tilted in her hand, eyes glinting with the same smugness I remembered from the day she took my fiancé. "You made it," she said, her smile razor sharp. "Alone, I see." I didn't answer. My coat slid from my shoulders into the waiting hands of the maitre d', and I took my seat with measured calm. Around us, forks clinked, and someone made a joke about déjà vu. The truth was, I'd prepared for this night for months, not to humiliate her, not even to prove I'd moved on, but to close a chapter that had festered in silence for years. Then the door behind me opened. A ripple went through the room. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossed the polished floor. My sister's eyes darted past me. Her smirk faltered. And before I even turned, I knew she'd recognize the man who'd just walked in. My husband. The room seemed to shrink the moment Nathan's shadow stretched across the table. He was a tall man, the kind whose presence commanded attention, without trying his suit, tailored in a way that whispered authority more than it shouted it. The overhead light caught the edge of his cufflinks, silver, understated, the kind that didn't need to announce their worth. I didn't have to turn to feel the shift. Conversations faltered, the soft clink of cutlery paused mid-air. My sister Lila set her wine glass down the base, clicking against the table, a fraction too hard. Her husband Dean looked between us, with the faint, puzzled frown of someone who'd just realized they'd walked into the middle of a story without knowing the first chapter. Nathan's hand came to rest on my shoulder, a light but steady touch. He leaned down, his voice, a low murmur, pitched just enough for Lila to catch. "Traffic was worse than I thought," he said. I tilted my head up to him, unhurried. "You made it," I replied, letting a small, measured smile touch my lips. Lila's expression tightened, barely a second's worth of tension, but enough. She'd always been composed, a master of social facades. Years ago, she'd been the one with a man beside her, basking in the validation of being chosen, her confidence swelling with every approving glance. Tonight, that balance had shifted, and she didn't yet know how to carry it. Nathan slid into the empty seat beside me. The conversation, which had evaporated upon his arrival, restarted in awkward fragments: the weather, someone's new car, a recent trip to Napa. Yet every word was threaded with an unspoken curiosity about the man at my side. I let them wonder. It was strange sitting here in the same restaurant where Lila had once toasted her engagement to the man who was supposed to be mine. I remembered that night too well: the golden glow of the candles, the taste of champagne that soured in my mouth, the moment I noticed her hand slip under the table to clasp his. People laughed, clapped, raised their glasses, oblivious to the fact that my world had just been dismantled. Tonight, the air felt different. No betrayal here, only control. Mine. Nathan's hand brushed over mine on the table, his touch grounding. The gold band on my finger caught the light, subtle but unmistakable. Lila's gaze dropped to it, then flicked back up to my face. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, then closed again. Dean, still unaware of the undercurrent, leaned forward. "So Nathan, what do you do?" Nathan's answer was simple. "Consulting, nothing more. No titles, no explanations, just enough to keep the mystery intact." I knew his work couldn't be easily explained over dinner, without drawing too much attention, and for now, I preferred Lila stay in the dark. The waiter appeared with menus, offering a welcome pause. I ordered with quiet precision, Nathan following without hesitation. Lila hesitated, her eyes scanning the page, though I knew she'd memorized it years ago. It was a small thing, but telling her first real sign of uncertainty. When the waiter left, Nathan leaned toward me. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. "Perfectly." My gaze stayed fixed on Lila as I said it. She gave a quick, brittle laugh, loud enough for the table to hear. "Well, this is unexpected," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "How so?" I asked, my tone almost curious. Her eyes darted between us. "I just didn't think we'd all be here like this." "Oh," I said lightly, lifting my water glass. "Life's full of surprises." The words hung in the air for a moment. I watched her fingers tighten slightly around the stem of her glass. Years ago, I'd been the one holding my breath in her presence, searching for some anchor in a room where everyone else was on her side. Tonight, she was the one searching for footing. A server passed behind me, refilling glasses, and the sound of liquid pouring seemed louder than it should have been. I took a sip, steadying my own heartbeat, not because I was nervous, but because I didn't want to rush this. There was power in patience. Nathan began chatting with Dean about something trivial, the wine list, I think, but I barely heard them. My attention was on Lila, cataloging every flicker of discomfort. She glanced at her husband, then at Nathan, and I could almost see the calculations running behind her eyes. She wanted to ask who he was, what he did, how we'd met, but to do that in front of everyone would expose her curiosity, and Lila never liked to give anyone the satisfaction of knowing she didn't have all the answers. I leaned back slightly, letting my shoulders relax, my smile small but deliberate. This wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about reclaiming the part of myself she had stolen without apology, and judging by the faint tremor in her hand as she reached for her wine, I was already halfway there. The taste of the bread on the table was faintly bitter, though I knew it wasn't the food. Nathan was speaking with Dean about a vineyard outside Sonoma, but my mind kept tracing the cracks in the past, the ones that had started the night Lila crossed a line she could never uncross. I hadn't thought about that evening in detail for years. I'd trained myself to smooth over the memory, to pack it away in the mental storage closet where I kept things too sharp to touch. But seeing her now across the table dredged it up in vivid color. 3 years ago, I had been the one wearing the ring. A different ring, smaller, more delicate, but still a promise. The man was James, a quiet, reliable presence, who I thought would anchor my life. Lila had seemed thrilled for me, her laugh easy and bright, the way it always was when she was at the center of someone's attention. I should have seen the signs. The way her gaze lingered on him too long, the way she leaned in when she spoke to him, her hand brushing his arm as if by accident. Back then, I told myself it was nothing. Sisters are allowed to be close. That's what I thought until the night she announced their engagement, months later, with no warning, no apology. She'd sent me a single text that morning, "Dinner tonight. Don't be late." The restaurant had been crowded, the air warm with candlelight and the murmur of conversation. I'd walked in expecting a family meal, maybe a belated birthday celebration. Instead, I saw them at the head of the table, her hand resting on his like it belonged there. The smile she gave me was sharp, almost daring me to react. I didn't. Not then. I'd sat through the toasts clapped when everyone else did and felt each cheer land like a bruise. After that, I disappeared for a while. Moved cities, changed jobs, built a life that didn't intersect with hers. She reached out occasionally, birthdays, holidays, but it was always perfunctory, as if to remind herself she was still in control of the narrative. She didn't know about Nathan. We met in the kind of place Lila would have dismissed as unremarkable, a small coffee shop tucked away on a quiet street, the kind where people went to work or read not to be seen. He'd been sitting by the window laptop, open, his gaze shifting occasionally to the world outside. I noticed him because he wasn't performing for anyone. Our first conversation had been about coffee of all things. He'd asked if the roast was any good. I told him it depended on whether he liked his mornings to taste like smoke or earth. He'd smiled slow and amused, and I'd felt something shift. Nathan didn't need to talk about himself, which made me want to know more. It took weeks before I learned he was a consultant, the kind who flew across time zones to solve problems no one else could fix. There was a steadiness to him, a kind of quiet authority that drew people in. By the time he asked me to dinner, I realized I'd stopped thinking about the past in terms of loss. It was just a closed chapter. Or so I thought. Tonight, watching Lila across the table, I could see the moment recognition hit her, not of Nathan himself, but of the fact that he didn't fit into any of her categories. He wasn't from our social circle, yet he carried himself like someone who could own it. That unsettled her. The food arrived: salmon for me, lamb for Nathan, something elaborate and plated like artwork for Lila. I picked up my fork, but my appetite was secondary to the satisfaction of watching her try to place him. "So how did you two meet?" she asked finally, her tone light but edged. Nathan glanced at me, letting me decide how much to reveal. "In the city," I said simply. "It wasn't planned." "That's vague," she replied, taking a bite without looking at me. I smiled. "Some things don't need embellishment." Her eyes flicked to Nathan again. "And what kind of consulting is it that keeps you out late? Different kinds?" Nathan said, his voice even. "Each situation's unique." It wasn't an answer, not really, but it left her with nothing to work with. She hated that. Dean jumped in with a story about a trip they'd taken to Hawaii, and for a while the tension receded into the background noise of clinking silverware and murmured conversations. But I caught her watching us when she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze darting between my hand, resting lightly on Nathan's, and his calm focus on me whenever I spoke. Once, years ago, I would have given anything for her approval, for her to see me as someone worth envying. Now I realized I didn't need it. The fact that she was unsettled was enough. I took another bite of salmon, savoring it, not the taste, but the quiet victory it symbolized. This wasn't about flaunting Nathan or the life I'd built without her. It was about balance being restored. And by the way she kept glancing at me, I knew she felt it too. Lila's laugh rang out across the table, a little too loud for the mild joke Dean had made. It was the kind of laugh she used when she wanted to remind everyone she was the center of gravity. But her eyes kept drifting back to Nathan Sharp and calculating as if she could will an answer from him without asking the right question. I poured myself a glass of water, letting the coolness settle the faint heat in my chest. I didn't come here for a fight, but I wasn't going to give her the comfort of pretending nothing had happened between us. "Viv, you've been quiet," my mother said from the far end, her tone warm, but with that undercurrent of curiosity she'd never been able to hide. "You usually have so much to share." "I'm listening," I replied, giving her a smile. "It's interesting watching the dynamic here." Dean chuckled, but Lila's fork stilled for a fraction of a second before moving again. The server came to clear plates, and Nathan leaned toward me slightly, his shoulder brushing mine, a small natural touch that drew Lila's gaze like a magnet. So she began tilting her head in that practiced way. "Nathan, where did you say you were from?" "I didn't," he said, polite but firm. "But I grew up on the coast." Her brows lifted just enough to suggest she wasn't satisfied. "Coastal boy. Must be nice. Did you two travel much before you met?" Nathan's eyes met hers directly, his expression unreadable. "We've traveled plenty since. Together." That answer sat between them like a stone dropped into water rippling outward. Lila's lips curved, but it was more reflex than warmth. The dessert menus arrived, giving her a moment to retreat behind the polite shuffle of ordering. I declined. Nathan followed suit. Lila chose something intricate: chocolate, layered over custard, the kind of thing she would never actually finish, but ordered for the presentation. When the plates were set down, she leaned back in her chair. "You know, Viv," she said lightly, "I'm glad you bounced back. After James, I wasn't sure you would." The table stilled just enough for me to notice. My father cleared his throat. Dean looked away. Nathan's hand resting on the table tightened slightly. "I did more than bounce back," I said evenly. "I built something worth keeping." Her smile froze for half a second before she took another dainty bite of dessert. "Of course you did." The conversation splintered after that small talk, the weather, a new restaurant someone had tried, but under it all, I could feel her discomfort. She was used to holding the upper hand, to deciding when and how to acknowledge past betrayals. Tonight, that script wasn't hers to control. As the plates were cleared again, I caught Nathan watching her with quiet curiosity, like someone assessing the edges of a puzzle piece to see where it fit. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone shifted the air. And Lila. She kept smiling, but the cracks were there now, hairline fractures that would only widen before the night was over. The room had settled into a strange quiet, the kind that follows forced laughter and too many glances toward the clock. Lila was still leaning into her role, chatty poised, the perfect hostess. But her eyes kept darting toward the entrance, as if she was waiting for something. Or someone. I let her stew in that quiet panic for a few beats longer before reaching into my clutch. The metallic click of the clasp opening drew her gaze. From it, I pulled a simple velvet box no bigger than my palm. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The sight alone was enough to drain the remaining color from her face. Her husband noticed immediately. "What's that?" He asked, his voice light, but his brow furrowed. "An old piece," I said smoothly. "From years ago. It never fit me back then. But it fits perfectly now." The man's curiosity overcame his manners. "May I?" I slid the box across the table. His fingers opened it with a casual flick and froze. Inside lay the engagement ring that had once been his wife's trophy, the very symbol of her victory over me. Except now, it gleamed on a bed of white satin, perfectly polished, a silent testament to the fact that some things like truth could be reclaimed. His eyes darted to her. "You told me you pawned this years ago." Lila's lips parted, but no words came. A flush climbed her neck. I leaned back, my smile faint but steady. No, she didn't pawn it. She lost it. The weight of the room shifted. Conversations at the other end of the table slowed, then stopped entirely. People were listening now, whether they meant to or not. Lila's voice finally broke the silence. "Vivienne, this isn't the place." "Exactly," I cut in my tone, cool. "This isn't the place for lies." Her husband set the ring down with deliberate care, as though it might burn him. He didn't look at her again. Across the table, my husband reached over and rested his hand lightly on mine, not to restrain, but to anchor. His presence was a steady current under my composure, the unspoken reminder that I wasn't here to humiliate for sport. I was here to end a story she'd kept alive for too long. Lila swallowed the sound loud in the stillness. "You always were dramatic," she tried, her voice brittle. I didn't rise to it. I didn't need to. The silence was heavier than any retort I could have crafted. After a long pause, I stood. Every chair seemed to shift with me, the scrape of wood on polished floors echoing louder than it should have. I placed the ring back in the box, snapped it shut, and slipped it into my clutch once more. "Dinner was lovely," I said to no one in particular. "But I think we're done here." And just like that, the room exhaled, except for Lila. She sat, rigid eyes fixed on her untouched plate, her carefully curated evening in ruins. The night air outside was crisp, sharp enough to cut through the remnants of tension clinging to me. My husband's hand slipped into mine as we walked toward the car, his thumb brushing over my knuckles, a small grounding gesture that said more than any words. Through the tall dining room windows, I could still see the table. Lila hadn't moved. Her husband was speaking to someone at the far end, deliberately avoiding her gaze. Whatever facade she'd built had cracked in front of the very audience she craved. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. This wasn't about winning. It was about closing the book she'd kept open all these years, a book filled with half-truths and stolen moments she wore like a crown. My heels clicked softly against the pavement as we reached the car. My husband opened the door for me, and before sliding in, I glanced back one last time. For years I'd thought confronting her would be loud, messy, and fueled by anger. But standing there in the quiet aftermath, I realized something: true closure isn't a victory march. It's the calm that comes when you no longer need anyone to believe your side of the story. I had nothing left to prove, not to her, not to the family that once turned their faces away. The people who mattered already knew the truth. As the car pulled away, I let out a slow breath. Lila could keep whatever stories she wanted. I had my own life now, built on trust, on love, and on the kind of dignity no one could ever steal again. And that was worth far more than any ring. The oak doors groaned as they swung open, and the murmurs in the courtroom flattened into silence. I stepped across the threshold in my service uniform, every ribbon and bar exactly where it belonged. My name echoed through the chamber as the bailiff's voice rang out Brigadier General Rowan Hale, Deputy Commander, U.S. Army Cyber Command. That's me, Rowan Hale. The sister they told the world had washed out of basic training, the one they swore could never finish what she started. The one they laughed about over champagne. The judge stood. The jury stood. Even my father, who once called my commission a phase, pushed himself to his feet before he seemed to realize why. Across the room, my sister Lydia sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. The smirk she had worn in every photo, every family dinner, every whispered insult, it was gone. In its place was something raw and colorless, a look that told me she'd finally connected the dots. I didn't stop to savor it. I moved to my seat with the same measured pace I'd used in war zones, my eyes forward, my face unreadable. Because this wasn't about proving her wrong anymore. This was about putting the truth on record quietly, completely, and for good. And it had started months before, in a place far from the polished wood and flags of this courtroom. 6 months before the courtroom, I was standing in the marble lobby of the Jefferson Grand Hotel in Arlington, Virginia, wondering why I'd agreed to show up at all. The air smelled faintly of truffle oil and money. Waiters in black jackets moved like clockwork between polished tables in the ballroom, carrying plates that looked more like art than food. It was Lydia's night, her promotion to Senior Vice President at Lockridge Systems, one of the largest defense contractors in the country, the kind of job title that makes politicians nod and generals return calls. I'd just rotated home from an overseas assignment I couldn't talk about. 2 weeks of leave. I'd planned to spend them sleeping and running along the river. But my mother's voice on the phone had been sweet and pointed. It's Family Rowan. Don't make a scene by not coming. So I came. I blended into the crowd wearing a simple black dress that wouldn't invite questions. I stood near the back, sipping club soda, watching Lydia move through the room like she owned it. Halfway through dinner, she stopped beside a tall man with steel gray hair, a name I recognized instantly from Pentagon briefings. He was one of Lockridge's top clients, a senior DoD acquisitions official. Lydia's eyes sparkled as she leaned toward him, one manicured hand gesturing toward me across the table. "My little sister Rowan," she said, smiling like she'd just discovered a stray pet. She even tried the Army once, but couldn't make it through basic training. Now she shuffles papers at some government office. Her tone was casual, almost playful, but every word landed like a stone in water rippling through the table. The man's gaze flicked to me, brief assessing too polite to linger. But I knew what he heard. In his world, competence and service were currency, and Lydia had just declared me bankrupt. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct her. I simply lifted my glass, met his eyes, and let a small, unreadable smile cross my face. Because tomorrow morning, in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, I'd be briefing him on a classified operation he didn't yet know existed. And he would learn in detail exactly what kind of paperwork I handled. I grew up in a house where value was measured in applause, not in effort. When I was 18, 2 life-changing envelopes arrived within the same week. Lydia's came first, her acceptance letter to Columbia's business school, delivered in a thick packet that my parents displayed on the mantel like it was a family heirloom. Dad handed her a set of keys wrapped in a satin bow. The new sedan outside gleamed in the driveway, the scent of leather still fresh. The next day, my envelope arrived, orders to report to Officer Candidate School. I stood in the living room in my Reserve Officer Corps uniform, the paper shaking slightly in my hands from excitement. Dad glanced at it, offered a distracted, "That's nice, kiddo," and went back to admiring the shine on Lydia's car. My mother, ever the diplomat, slipped me a $50 bookstore gift card at dinner. "For your free time," she said, as if my next year would be full of leisurely afternoons. I remember nodding, swallowing the lump in my throat, and telling myself it didn't matter. But it did. Every promotion, every assignment after that, I learned to carry quietly. While Lydia's accomplishments were toasted with champagne, mine were filed away like an afterthought. The science fair I won in high school, the academic scholarship I fought for, they were nice little hobbies. By the time I'd made major, I'd stopped telling them much at all. They had their version of me, and I had mine. It was easier to keep the worlds separate. 15 years later, those worlds were still running parallel until they finally collided. It happened in a secure briefing room deep inside Fort Hamilton. The walls were thick with layered security. No cell signals, no windows. I was a colonel, then leading a cyber counterintelligence team tasked with a new case codename Operation Sentinel Veil. The mission was to trace a data breach targeting classified targeting algorithms used overseas. It wasn't just numbers and code. It was the kind of intel that in the wrong hands could cost lives. The breach pointed inward, not out. A senior executive within a contracted firm was selling information to a non-state entity. When the name surfaced, I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't shock, it was clarity. The lead suspect was my sister Lydia Hale. I didn't wait. Within the hour, I walked straight to Major General Strickland's office. He was the kind of commander who didn't waste words, a man whose respect you earned once and kept only by never slipping. I stood at attention in front of his desk, the suspect file in my hand. Sir, the lead target in Sentinel Veil is Lydia Hale. She's my sister. I'm formally declaring a personal connection and potential conflict of interest. Recommend I be recused from operational command. He didn't look surprised, just leaned back, steepling his fingers. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the air system. Finally, he said, "Colonel, you've been running this case for 6 weeks without knowing the name. Your team's work is airtight. That's not a liability, it's an asset. You stay on this. And you do it by the book." "Yes, sir." He tapped the folder. "JAG will handle prosecution. Your job is to deliver them a case that leaves no daylight, no appeal, no room for doubt." His gaze fixed on mine. "Do you understand what I'm telling you I did?" He was trusting me to walk the line between blood and duty without falling off either side. From that day on, the investigation became my shadow life. Days blurred into nights, under fluorescent lights, my team combing through terabytes of server logs, reconstructing Lydia's digital fingerprints. Every warrant request was triple-checked, every evidence tag signed twice. We didn't chase her. We documented her piece by piece until the story wrote itself in unshakable lines. I never called her, never sent a message. There would be no warning, no hint. The irony didn't escape me. Lydia thought of me as a failed soldier pushing paper. She didn't know the paper in front of me was a classified subpoena with her name on it. 3 months in, Chief Warrant Officer Kelly stepped into my office with a plain envelope. "Ma'am," he said with a rare smile, "promotion board, results are in." Inside was a single line. "Effective next month, you are hereby promoted to Brigadier General." I sat back, letting the weight of it settle. The rank wasn't just another milestone, it made me the convening authority for the trial of my own sister. The system she thought I'd never belong to had just handed me the gavel. Once the promotion orders came through, the game shifted. I wasn't just building a case anymore, I was securing the foundation of a verdict. Every move had to be unassailable, because Lydia's lawyers would treat the Uniform Code of Military Justice like a puzzle they could take apart. My job was to make sure there were no loose pieces. The days became a rhythm of precision. Early mornings started in the skiff. My team gathered around the long conference table as we cross-referenced transaction logs with travel records. We traced wire transfers from shell accounts in Malta to encrypted wallets bouncing through half a dozen countries. Every anomaly was documented, every source validated. In the afternoons, I sat with JAG attorneys in a glass-walled office, walking them through the technical evidence in plain language. They asked the right questions, the kind that could break a weak case. Ours didn't break. At night, after the building had gone quiet, I stayed in my office, reviewing packet after packet of intercepted communications. Some were dry corporate memos, project updates. Others were damning metadata tying Lydia's access badge to server rooms she had no reason to enter, messages routed through back channels hours before sensitive files appeared on foreign servers. I felt nothing reading them. That surprised me. I thought there would be anger or some kind of grim satisfaction, but all I felt was a steady cold focus, the same focus I'd had in operations where a single missed detail could cost lives. Outside the investigation, my life shrank to essentials. I skipped family calls, let birthdays pass without a text. The distance wasn't hard, it had been there for years. Now, it just had a purpose. 2 months before trial, we filed the final evidence packet. It was a monument of organized truth, thousands of pages, cross-indexed and verified. Lydia's attorneys petitioned for delays, citing corporate complexities. Each motion was denied. I never saw her during those months, but sometimes I imagined her still laughing at dinners, still telling the failed basic training story. I let her keep it right up until the day she'd have to stand and face the record we'd built, because this wasn't about telling her the truth. It was about showing it to everyone else. The trial was scheduled for a Monday morning at the Tidewater Military Justice Center, a place designed to make you feel the weight of tradition the moment you stepped inside. Dark oak paneling flags standing in perfect formation, the seal of the United States looming over the judge's bench. It was a stage built for accountability. I arrived before most of the gallery, escorted through a side entrance by a junior aide who looked like he wanted to ask questions but knew better. In the anteroom, the air was cool, sterile humming, with the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. A heavy file sat on the table in front of me, my name embossed on the top. It wasn't my role to present the case that belonged to the prosecution, but the signature that would authorize its outcome would be mine. Through the wall, I could hear the muted thud of doors, opening chairs, sliding voices dropping to a hush. I imagined Lydia at the defense table, wearing a suit calculated to project confidence. She would see the military panel career officers with rows of decorations and think they were just another boardroom to charm. I also pictured my parents in the gallery, their postures rigid, their expressions a mix of worry and irritation at being inconvenienced. They'd expect me to walk in quietly, maybe take a seat behind the prosecutors, a silent family member watching the spectacle. They had no idea the court's highest-ranking officer was waiting behind this door. A soft knock broke the thought. The bailiff stepped in, his expression formal. "General, they're ready for you." I stood smoothing the front of my service greens, feeling the single silver star on each shoulder. It wasn't the weight of metal, it was the sum of every year I'd carried, without recognition, every mission no one at home ever knew existed. The bailiff's voice carried into the chamber. "All rise." Announcing Brigadier General Rowan Hale, Deputy Commander, U.S. Army, Cyber Command. The scrape of chairs was sharp, unified. I stepped forward, not looking at Lydia yet. My focus was the judge, the panel, the room itself. My presence here was not a performance, it was the of a ledger I had spent months balancing, and before the day was done, that ledger would be closed. I reached my designated seat at the side of the chamber, the position reserved for the convening authority. I offered the judge a crisp nod before sitting back, straight hands folded loosely on the table. Only then did I let my gaze shift. Lydia's eyes were already on me. At first there was confusion, like she was trying to match the uniform in front of her with the version of me she'd carried in her head for years. The one who couldn't make it through basic training, the one she could reduce to a punchline at a dinner party. Her brow tightened. I could almost see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the rank insignia, the ribbon rack, the nameplate. Each detail chipped away at the story she'd told herself until there was nothing left to cling to. Color drained from her face. I didn't smile. I didn't tilt my head in acknowledgement. I simply met her stare for a single, even heartbeat before turning my attention back to the bench. The silence between us was louder than any accusation I could have spoken. The lead prosecutor rose, a lean Army major, with the kind of bearing that came from years of field work. He began outlining the charges: procurement fraud, unauthorized disclosure of classified targeting data, conspiracy to commit espionage. Each count landed like a drumbeat. When he said the words, Operation Sentinel Veil, Lydia's gaze flicked to me again. This time, there was no confusion, only the dawning realization that I hadn't just been present in her trial. I had been the one standing at the center of the investigation. The panel of officers listened without expression, but I could feel the atmosphere shift. The case was strong, the evidence layered and airtight, and Lydia knew it. For 15 years, she had occupied the role of the untouchable sibling, shielded by charm and connections. Now those shields were nothing but paper in a room where truth was logged, signed, and stamped into permanence. I kept my eyes forward. My role here was not to gloat. It was to ensure the process ran clean without bias or theatrics. Justice didn't need a victory lap. It only needed to be done. The proceedings moved with deliberate precision. Witnesses testified, documents were entered into evidence, and the defense tried unsuccessfully to poke holes in a case that had been built like reinforced steel. I stayed silent through it all. My role wasn't to sway the panel or weigh in on objections. My presence was the reminder that this court had the full backing of its convening authority, and that the uniform behind the title would see the process through to the end. 2 days in the panel returned from deliberations. The courtroom felt smaller in that moment, the air heavier. The foreman, a full-bird colonel with a face carved from stone, stood and read the findings. On all counts, guilty. The words were crisp, final. I didn't look at Lydia. My eyes were on the judge as he confirmed the verdict and instructed the clerk to prepare the sentencing paperwork. A few minutes later, the file was placed in front of me on the table. It was a plain manila folder, the weight of it far greater than the paper it contained. My pen rested at the top of the page where my name was typed, beneath the words, Convening Authority Approval. I thought briefly of the girl who'd been given a $50 gift card while her sister was handed a car. The officer who had been patted on the shoulder with polite dismissal. The soldier whose family thought she was just shuffling papers. I signed with one clean stroke. There was no flourish, no pause to savor the moment. It wasn't about winning. It was about ending something that had been broken for a very long time. I stood, nodded once to the judge, and left the chamber through the same side door I'd entered. The murmur of voices swelled behind me, but I didn't turn back. Outside the hallway was cool and quiet. Major General Strickland was waiting, his hands clasped behind his back. "Good work, General," he said simply. "It was my duty, sir," I replied. And it was the truest thing I'd ever said. The chapter was closed. What came next would have nothing to do with Lydia or the version of me my family had chosen to believe. A year later, I stood under warm stage lights in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, delivering the keynote address at the U.S. Army War College graduation. The auditorium was filled with colonels and newly minted generals, men and women who had led in places the public would never know about. I spoke of integrity as armor of the quiet decisions that defined command of the weight that came with wearing the uniform when no one was watching. It wasn't a speech about my sister, but every word came from the same place that had carried me through her trial. Afterward, I moved through the crowd, answering questions, shaking hands. That was when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen and saw my mother's name for the first time in over a year. The message was short. "We're proud of you, Rowan. We just never knew. Can we talk?" For a moment, the words landed like a ghost of something I used to want. I could almost see the younger version of me, hungry for that approval, waiting for it to mean something. But it didn't anymore. My worth had been measured in the trust of my peers, in missions completed in the men and women who stood when my name was called. I slid the phone back into my pocket without replying. As I rejoined my colleagues, the conversation turned to an upcoming operation, and my focus shifted with it. My peace wasn't theirs to give, and it would never again be theirs to take away. Legacy, I'd learned, isn't about the applause you get. It's about the record you leave behind and the quiet authority that carries on after you're gone. And mine was just getting started. I'm Cassandra Ellery, and 5 years ago, my sister ripped my life apart. She didn't just steal my fiancé, she paraded him in front of me at every family gathering, as if I was supposed to applaud her. I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I had already decided the day she took him would be the last day she had power over me. Last Saturday, I walked into the charity gala with my husband Marcus. The room was lit in gold and silver, the kind of place where every glance is a calculation. I knew she would be there draped in diamonds. He probably bought her, carrying the air of someone who thinks the past is buried. She didn't notice me at first, but then her gaze slid past the waiters over the champagne glasses and landed on the man beside me. Her smile faltered. I could see the recognition hit like ice water. Marcus shook hands with a board member, his other hand resting lightly on the small of my back, protective certain. My sister's eyes widened, her fingers tightening around her glass. I didn't need to say a word. She knew exactly who he was, and why, after all these years, the balance had shifted. 5 years earlier, the night everything cracked, the house smelled of cinnamon and roast chicken. It was supposed to be my engagement dinner. My fiancé Daniel had spent weeks planning it with me, down to the playlist and the wine. My sister Lila offered to help with the setup. I should have known better. Halfway through the evening, after the toasts, she slipped into the seat beside him. She laughed at every word he said, leaning in just close enough for her perfume to mingle with his cologne. It was subtle at first. Then, during dessert, she took his hand. I remember the way my mother's gaze darted to mine, quick and sharp, as if silently telling me not to make a scene. My father kept carving the roast, avoiding my eyes altogether. In that moment, I realized something. They weren't shocked. They were expecting it. When Daniel announced right there at my own engagement dinner that he and Lila were in love and had to be honest, the room went silent except for the hum of the chandelier. No one defended me. No one told them to stop. Lila squeezed his hand like she'd won a prize. My parents smiled thin and polite, as if the humiliation of their eldest daughter was a small price for whatever they thought they were gaining. I left quietly, my heels clicking against the hardwood like a clock counting down. No shouting, no tears, just a hollow calm settling into my bones. Because I understood something they didn't. They thought they'd ended me. But I was already planning the life I'd build without them, a life so far from their reach, they'd only hear about it in whispers. The following morning, I packed a single suitcase. I didn't leave a note. I didn't answer calls. I deleted every number except the few that mattered for work. And then I disappeared into the city like smoke, carrying nothing but the sting of betrayal and the quiet determination to become untouchable. What I didn't know then was that one day, the man standing beside me would be the final piece of that plan, and the reason my sister's perfect little world would crack wide open. The first year after I left was the hardest and the quietest. I rented a one-bedroom above a bookstore in a part of the city my family would never set foot in. No one there knew me as the daughter of Charles and Elaine Whitlock. I was just Cassandra, the woman who worked late and kept her curtains half closed. By day, I buried myself in work. I'd been in marketing before, but now I treated every project like a stepping stone. I said yes to jobs no one wanted, learned the numbers side of the business, and taught myself the contracts so no one could trick me again. My nights were for courses, negotiation, finance leadership. It was exhausting, but exhaustion was easier to bear than the ache of betrayal. Sometimes in the still hours, I'd remember Lila's smirk as she held Daniel's hand, the way my parents looked relieved instead of horrified. It didn't make me angry anymore. It made me focused. Every small win felt like a brick in the wall I was building between their world and mine. It was during a late-night charity gala, work-related, nothing personal, that I met Marcus Hale. Tall, quiet, with a gaze that seemed to notice more than he let on. We ended up at the same table, making polite conversation over salmon and wine. He didn't ask about my family. He didn't even seem curious. Instead, he asked about the marketing strategy I'd presented earlier that week and the way I'd handled a pushy investor. By the end of the night, I knew two things about Marcus. He was sharp, and he was used to making decisions that mattered. What I didn't know yet was that he came from a world my family would never be able to touch, a world where respect wasn't bought with charm, but earned through results and loyalty. We started working together on a project a few months later, then another. Slowly, friendship became trust. Trust became something deeper. And in that process, I built not just a career, but a life. 5 years passed before our paths would cross with my family again. And when they did, Marcus wasn't just the man I loved. He was the one man who could shatter every illusion Lila had built around herself. It started with a cream-colored envelope slid under my office door. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly, Lila's looping practiced script. Inside was an embossed card, Whitlock Family Charity Gala, celebrating 10 years of service. Attendance requested. Requested. Not invited. As if they were summoning me. For a moment, I almost tossed it in the trash. 5 years had passed since I'd heard their voices in person. Every interaction since had been filtered through polite, impersonal emails about inherited property or old accounts. They had erased me from their lives, and I'd been fine with that. More than fine. But I wasn't the same woman they'd last seen. And the truth was, I was curious. Not about them, but about what it would feel like to walk into their perfect little world again on my own terms. When I told Marcus about the invitation, he listened without interrupting. Then he simply said, "If you go as yourself, not as their daughter, as..." His tone wasn't sharp, but it was steady, the kind of steadiness that came from knowing exactly who you are. So I planned. I didn't call to confirm. I didn't send a note. On the night of the gala, I wore black silk and a diamond pin Marcus had given me last winter, understated but impossible to ignore. My hair was swept up my heels, sharp enough to make each step sound deliberate. The venue was exactly as I remembered, white columns, glittering chandeliers, and guests who measured worth in names and net worth. I moved through the crowd like a shadow, exchanging nods, offering quiet smiles. People looked at me with polite curiosity, trying to place me, but no one dared to ask. Then I saw her. Lila, in a pale gold gown, her laugh bright and brittle, as she held court with a circle of admirers. Daniel wasn't with her. She was thinner than I remembered, her eyes sharper, but her posture still carried the same smug tilt. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, her smile faltered. Only for a second, but it was enough to tell me she'd thought she'd never have to see me again. She had no idea the man I'd walked in with was about to rewrite that assumption. Marcus arrived 20 minutes after I did, because that's how he moves through rooms like this, never rushed, never late, always on time for himself. I watched him cross the marble foyer, accepting a handshake from the event director, nodding to a pair of donors whose names were etched in brass on the wall. He looked effortless in a midnight tuxedo, the kind that didn't wear him. When his eyes found mine, the corners crinkled. He didn't kiss me. He didn't need the gesture to make a point. He simply offered his arm, and I took it. We hadn't made 2 steps toward the ballroom before the foundation's chair intercepted us. "Marcus!" he said, relief in his voice. "We're lining up the speakers. The press pit's already crowding the west balcony." "I'll be brief," Marcus replied. "This night isn't about me." It was only a sentence, but I saw 2 heads swivel nearby. Recognition works like a ripple. It touches one person, and then another, and then the whole surface moves. When we entered the ballroom, the band slipped into something softer. The ceiling was awash of warm gold, catching the edges of crystal and glass, until the air itself seemed to glitter. Waiters flowed like a tide trays of champagne canapes, the quiet choreography of money, pretending to be generosity. Lila noticed us immediately this time. Her gaze landed on Marcus, jumped to me, and then returned to him, as if the first look had been a mistake. She tilted her chin, confusion cracking into something sharper. I guided us toward the donor board, so Marcus could sign the evening ledger. The coordinator handed him a pen, with both hands reverent as if passing a baton. Beside his name were the words, "Matching Endowment, Anonymous Benefactor." So the secret was out. The band paused. A microphone squeaked. The chair stepped onto the small stage and tapped the glass lectern. "Friends, before we begin, the pledge is a word from the man who made tonight's expansion possible through his firm's partnership and through personal support. Please welcome Marcus Hale. Applause isn't always loud. Sometimes it's respectful, standing carefully between curiosity and awe." Marcus squeezed my hand once, before he let go and climbed the steps. He didn't launch into a speech. He just stood there until the room quieted around him. I grew up watching my mother figure out the grocery bill with a pencil, he said. Community kept our heads above water. So when I can, I give back to the places that taught me the difference between wealth and worth. He nodded toward the back rows where the program's scholarship students sat with their families' starched collars and shy smiles. Tonight is for them. He kept it to 90 seconds. The chair loved him for it. So did the press. When he returned, Lila was already moving. She broke from her circle with a smile that tried to be casual and landed somewhere between startled and hungry. "Mr. Hale," she said, extending a hand like she was already in a photograph. "I'm Lila Whitlock. We have mutual acquaintances." Marcus took her hand because he is polite. "Good to meet you." I watched the exact instant she connected the dots. Her pupils tightened, her breath hitched. "Cassandra," she said, her voice softening to a register I recognized from childhood, the one she used when she wanted something. "You didn't say—" "I wasn't asked," I said. She laughed, a high little sound that bounced off the crystal and disappeared. Small world. I actually pitched a campaign to Hale and North 2 years ago. She turned to Marcus, leaning in just enough to catch the light on her cheekbone. "We didn't get it, but well, I've admired your work since the Durant acquisition." Marcus's expression didn't change. "We passed on that campaign because the media plan relied on manufactured scarcity. Our foundation funds actual scarcity food housing access. I'm sure you understand the difference." The smile held for a heartbeat. Then it slipped. Color drained from her face the way tide leaves a shore steady inevitable. She wasn't just pale, she was unmoored. Her eyes flicked to the press across the room, then back to Marcus, then to me, as if someplace in that triad there had to be a safe landing. "Excuse me?" she murmured, reaching for a champagne flute from a passing tray and missing it by a fraction. The glass wobbled. I steadied it with 2 fingers and passed it back to the waiter. She swallowed and tried again. "I didn't realize you two knew each other." "We're married," I said, and felt nothing but the simple truth of it settle in my chest, like a stone perfectly fitted to a palm. Something inside her faltered. I could see the math in her eyes, the way she recalculated history, the girl she'd pushed aside at 29, the man she'd taken because she could, the silence she mistook for defeat. And now this. Marcus glanced toward the student tables. "If you'll excuse me, I promised to meet the robotics team." He nodded to Lila, a courtesy not an invitation, and to me, a look that said everything we hadn't needed to say all night. Then he walked away. Lila watched him go, lips parting like there might be a plea there or a question she couldn't shape. The band began a slow standard. Couples shifted onto the floor. The chair's wife laughed in a way that sounded like relief. Around us, the gala resumed. "Was there anything you wanted to ask me?" I said. Her head jerked back. "No." "I know." "That's a first," I said, and let it be gentle. She tried to smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "You look different." "I am." We stood for a moment in the soft gold of the room we'd both been trained to worship. Then a photographer called her name from across the floor, habit muscle memory, a reflexive tilt of the chin, and she turned out of instinct to face the lens. The flash went off. She didn't pose quickly enough. And in that fraction of a second, the camera caught her exactly as she was not triumphant. Not gracious, just pale. I set my empty glass on a passing tray and stepped toward the balcony doors, the air beyond them dark and cool. Lila didn't follow. Behind me, the band shifted keys. Ahead, the night waited with its quiet questions. And somewhere between the two, I felt the smallest tug, an old story loosening its hold. "Come find me after the pledge," Marcus had said with a look. I pushed open the door and went to meet him. The balcony air was crisp, a thin edge of autumn, cutting through the city's lingering heat. Below, headlights streamed along the avenue, weaving in and out like veins carrying some larger unseen pulse. I leaned against the railing for a moment, letting the noise inside dissolve into the hum of traffic. Marcus was there, one hand in his pocket, the other cradling a short glass that glinted amber in the light spilling from the ballroom. He didn't speak right away. That was one of the first things I noticed about him years ago. his ability to leave silence unfilled until it mattered. "You handled that well," he said at last, eyes still on the skyline. "I didn't say anything," I replied. "That's why it worked." A server stepped out, set 2 more glasses on a nearby table, and retreated without a word. The door closed, muffling the gala's polished chatter. We were in our own orbit now. From inside the pledge drive had begun cheerful voices urging numbers higher, the soft percussion of credit cards against linen as people signed their names to causes they'd forget by Monday. Out here, the city's rhythm was steadier, less performative. Marcus turned toward me, his expression easy but searching. "She didn't expect me. She never expects consequences," I said. There was no bitterness in my voice, just the weight of a fact worn smooth over time. Lila had been moving through life on the assumption that outcomes bent to her charm, that people forgot the harm if she kept smiling. For years, I'd let her believe it. Tonight, I hadn't needed to correct her, the room had done it for me. "I didn't marry you to make a point," Marcus said, and I believed him. "But I'm not sorry," she saw. I met his gaze. The light caught at the edge of his hair, and for a moment the image felt like something a photographer would stage 2 figures on a balcony, gold behind them, city ahead. But there was nothing staged about this. It was the sum of years neither of us had to explain. Through the glass doors, I caught a glimpse of Lila moving between tables, her smile back in place, but thinner now, brittle at the edges. She laughed at something the chair's wife said, but her hand went to the stem of her glass twice in 10 seconds, a tell I'd known since we were kids. Marcus followed my glance, then let it go. "You don't owe her anything," he said. "I know." And I did. The part of me that once needed her recognition was gone, dissolved somewhere between the moment she walked away with my fiancé and the years I spent building a life without her shadow. The pledge drive inside hit a cheer someone had matched a major gift. Applause rolled like a polite wave. Marcus set down his drink. "We should go back in before the chair sends someone. In a minute." We stayed where we were, the sound of the city filling the space between us. Below, a couple walked hand in hand, their heads bent toward each other, in a conversation the rest of the world couldn't touch. I watched them until they disappeared under the canopy of a theater. When we finally stepped back inside, the room was in motion again, tables clinking, waiters clearing the low thrum of people satisfied with themselves. Lila was nowhere in sight. Marcus touched the small of my back. "Ready? Yes," I said. And I wasn't talking about leaving the gala, because somewhere in the quiet after her face went pale, I'd realized this night wasn't about showing her anything. It was about closing the last door she'd left open in my life. As we moved toward the exit, the golden light followed us to the threshold. Then the doors shut behind, and we stepped out into the cool night. No applause, no cameras, just the clean, certain air of something finished. We didn't speak of Lila on the drive home. The city lights slid past the windows, soft blurs in the dark. Marcus's hand rested over mine, steady, unspoken. In the quiet, I thought about the years between losing my first fiancé and marrying Marcus, the long stretch of work of learning to live without proving anything to anyone. I'd built something solid there, brick by brick, so that even tonight's encounter was just a ripple, not a storm. By the time we reached our street, I knew this was the real ending, not the moment she went pale, but the moment I no longer needed her to. The past had already happened, and the future, it was ours untouched. I walked inside, shut the door, and didn't look back. My name is Dana Mercer. I'm 38 years old, and I used to listen to enemies in languages they swore no one else could understand. 14 years in signal intelligence taught me that the most dangerous things are never said out loud. They're implied, whispered, or hidden behind, the way a man laughs just a second too late. That's why even now I don't react when I'm insulted. I watch, I wait, and I remember. At my sister's wedding, I stood in the garden like a ghost someone forgot to exercise. My dress was plain black, deliberately unremarkable. No one offered me champagne, no one asked why I came alone, but I knew why I was here, because not coming would have said more than showing up. When Colette walked down the aisle in custom lace, and a veil that caught the golden light like a crown, she didn't look at me until the last second. Her heels clicked once beside my row. Then she leaned in, smiled, with teeth too white, and whispered, still pretending to matter, Dana. I didn't flinch. But 15 minutes later, when her fiancé turned to a man beside him and muttered something in clipped Vorzin dialect words I hadn't heard since the Baltic raid, I adjusted my earring. No one noticed the gesture, but I did. And in my ear, a tiny piece of forgotten metal clicked to life. Callisto. Just one word. No drama. No threat. Just a whisper. But it was enough, because someone was still listening, and I was done being silent. The envelope arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, thick cream-colored perfumed. I didn't need to read the return address. Colette was the only person I knew who still believed in scented stationery. Inside was the formal invite, elegant calligraphy, a floral motif, and a separate note handwritten in my mother's script. If you decide to come, please, no military talk. Let your sister have her moment. As if I were a grenade someone had to pin down with etiquette. Then came the text from my father. Just 3 words, be normal. Dana. I stood at the kitchen counter, holding the card in one hand and a coffee mug in the other, watching the steam rise like it might carry all the unsaid things out of me. They weren't asking me to be present. They were asking me to stay invisible, tidy, quiet, and contained. But I went. I went not because I wanted to be there, but because staying away would confirm exactly what they believed about me, that I was fragile, paranoid, some shadow of the woman who used to come home in pressed uniform, sharp salutes, and a classified badge clipped under her coat. I packed light, black dress, low heels, a plain silver bracelet, and the only thing that still connected me to the woman I used to be, a matte black earpiece, no bigger than a fingernail, nestled inside a small velvet box. I hadn't touched it since my last sanctioned op in Kernstadt. It was technically outdated and definitely unauthorized, but it still worked. And sometimes instinct trumps protocol. I arrived at the estate just before dusk. The rehearsal dinner was already underway. White tense fairy lights, expensive laughter. No one greeted me. The valet took my rental car without a word. A server brushed past, nearly clipping my shoulder. My presence sucked the air from the patio like a dropped wine glass. I walked to the edge of the celebration and stopped. From here I could see my sister's world in full curated guests, curated lighting, curated smiles. Colette spotted me from across the lawn. Her face barely shifted, just a slight tilt of the chin, like she'd smelled something unexpected. Not foul, just inconvenient. Then she crossed the patio heels, clicking arms open in performance. Dana, she said, voice bright, artificial. I wasn't sure you'd come. I'm here, I said, simple as that. She hugged me like someone forced to shake hands with history brief cold and relieved to let go. And that's when I knew. She didn't want me there, not because I made her uncomfortable, but because deep down she knew I might see something she didn't want seen. Something even a wedding couldn't cover in lace. Dinner was served beneath a canopy of linen and chandelier bulbs, each table draped in blush silk, with place cards written in calligraphy. Mine wasn't among them. A staff member eventually pulled out a folding chair from the back, slid it in at the end of a table like a spare fork. It wobbled slightly on the flagstone. I didn't complain. I just sat. The guests around me spoke in polished tones, laughing too loud, sipping too softly. Colette hovered near the center of the space, perfectly lit, perfectly poised, the kind of bride that Instagram algorithms dream about. Her fiancé, Nikolai Mirov, stood beside her, with a presence that wasn't loud, but exact. Too exact. I'd seen men like him before, in consulates, in holding rooms, in the dark through glass. He didn't talk much, but his father Dmitri did. Silver hair, bespoke suit, a gaze that settled instead of scanned. He didn't eat the entree, just swirled his wine, watched the crowd. Occasionally, our eyes met. Not by accident. There was something in his stare I couldn't shake. Not suspicion. Recognition. During a toast, Colette introduced me to the group seated around her. "This is my sister," she said, flashing that rehearsed smile. "She used to do defense things. Now she lives in a cabin and listens to jazz." Polite laughter followed the kind that makes everyone feel superior for a moment. I didn't react. Instead, I watched a man across the table fumble with his cufflink and the flicker of a pendant at his collar. A matte black capsule no longer than my thumb. At first, I thought it was jewelry. It wasn't. I knew that shape. The last time I saw one was in Estonia, strapped to the neck of a tech runner we never caught. Those capsules weren't for decoration. They stored data at 3-tier encryption levels and could self-wipe via proximity triggers. In the right hands, it was intel. In the wrong ones, it was leverage. Nikolai wore it like it meant nothing, like no one in this crowd would know what it really was. He thought I was retired. He thought I was irrelevant. He was wrong. Because the only thing more dangerous than a soldier trained to fight is one who knows when not to. Back in my guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, lights off, curtain cracked just enough to let in the lavender glow of the string lights outside. Somewhere below, laughter swelled again, muffled by hedges and champagne. I wasn't listening for joy. I was listening for patterns. I pulled out the photo I'd kept folded in a weathered folder at the bottom of my bag. A single frame captured during a failed extraction in Kernstadt. Blurry, cropped at the jaw. But the angle, the posture, the curve of the neck, it was enough. The capsule pendant in that photo matched the one Nikolai wore like a charm. We never confirmed the man's identity. We just called him Spectre, untouchable, transient, tied to 4 dead-end accounts and 1 vanished NATO shipment. My report had flagged him for elevated risk. 2 weeks later, the file vanished from the encrypted server without explanation. The task force was dissolved, and I was moved. They buried the case and me with it, so I kept the photo. Not for revenge, but as a reminder, not all ghosts stay buried. I laid it beside my phone and stared at Nikolai's face again, this time from his engagement announcement. It wasn't an exact match. But the build, the bearing, the slight tilt of the head, it was there. Enough for the hairs on my arms to rise. I didn't have proof, not yet. But I didn't need certainty to prepare. I just needed time. Downstairs, silverware clinked. Someone cheered. A song drifted up through the vents, something nostalgic and safe. But my body had already begun to tighten with focus. That old familiar coil in the gut, the one that used to pull tight just before something exploded, not in volume, but in consequence. If Nikolai was Spectre, if that capsule held what I feared it meant, the operation wasn't over. It meant I was still in it. The agency had buried me once, hoping I'd vanish with the noise. But I didn't. I adapted. And tonight, if I had to, I would do what they didn't. I'd act, in silence. With precision. The next morning, I found her on the terrace outside the bridal suite veil, draped across her lap, like it was already too heavy. She was alone for once, away from her bridesmaids, her wedding planner, the carefully curated noise. She didn't hear me approach, not at first. "You always do this," she said, before turning her voice tight and sharp. "Turn every room into an interrogation." I stayed still, arms crossed, watching the lake shimmer in the morning haze. "I haven't asked a single question." "That's the worst part," she snapped. "You don't need to. You just look at people like you already know they're guilty." I lowered my voice. "Sometimes I do." She stood then, twisting the veil in her hands. "This isn't one of your missions, Dana. It's my wedding. For once, could you just not see everything?" There was something cracked in her tone, something deeper than irritation. Exhaustion, fear. I stepped closer. "Do you know who Nikolai really is?" She blinked. "He's the man I'm marrying, not what I asked." Silence stretched between us like a fault line. "I'm not accusing him," I said slower now. "But I've seen things. The way he moves. What he carries. The languages he uses when he thinks no one's listening. You don't recognize the signs because you weren't trained to. But I was." She shook her head, eyes narrowing. "Or maybe you're just desperate to make everything dangerous. Maybe you can't live without war." That stung more than I let on. But I didn't back down. "I'm not trying to ruin this, Colette." But if I thought you were safe, I wouldn't be saying a word. Her voice broke. He loves me. I believe that. But love doesn't erase history. She looked away, lips pressed tight, fighting something she didn't want to name. You think I want to be the one to say this? I asked. You think I want to be the person they dread inviting? She didn't answer. And that was answer enough. The worst part wasn't that she didn't believe me. It was that part of her did, and she didn't want to. By the time the string quartet began tuning up for the ceremony, I was already positioned at the edge of the reception lawn, tucked between a row of manicured hedges and the edge of the rose trellis. I wasn't hiding, but I wasn't inviting conversation either. The earpiece in my right ear warmed slightly as it calibrated to ambient sound. I adjusted it once casually, as if brushing back my hair. The voices filtered in, guests exchanging small talk, vendors confirming flower placements, someone complaining about the heat. Then I heard it. A voice low and clipped, speaking in a dialect I hadn't heard since a side alley briefing in Vorzen. Russian, but not Moscow Russian. Borderline paramilitary slang. The kind used by handlers, not diplomats. She suspects nothing. Package delivered after ceremony. I went still. The voice belonged to Nikolai. He wasn't close, maybe near the catering tent or on a walk with his father. But the mic caught it clear, precise. I closed my eyes, forcing my breathing to stay even. Another voice followed. Older, measured. Dmitri, use midnight diversion, full clean route. It wasn't conjecture anymore. It was operational language. Package, diversion, clean. I opened my eyes slowly, the grass in front of me, suddenly too green, too sharp. I reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, not to call, just to have it ready. Accusations wouldn't work here. Not against a man like Nikolai, not without backup. I moved slowly toward the edge of the garden, pretending to check the floral arrangements. My heels sunk slightly into the grass, but I didn't stop. When I reached the wrought iron angel statue near the perimeter wall, I touched my earring once. 2 chirps, one to activate the relay, one to open the line. I whispered Callisto. Confirmed chatter. Level 3. Eyes on groom and father. Possible handoff post-ceremony. Will signal activation. A pause. Then a single crackle in my ear. Acknowledged. No questions, no delays. They trusted me. That was more than I could say for my own family. The ceremony unfolded like a luxury magazine, spread rows of white chairs, a string quartet beneath an ivy-wrapped arch, petals scattered down the aisle, like they fell there naturally. Colette looked radiant, trembling, glowing whatever word brides are supposed to embody. Her veil trailed behind her like a surrender flag. I stayed near the back, barely inside the tent, hidden in plain sight. One hand rested lightly on my phone, the other at my side, fingers brushing against the small clasp of my bracelet, the signal trigger should voice fail. Nikolai stood still as she approached, his expression soft, maybe even proud. Only the faintest twitch in his jaw betrayed him when their hands met. Colette looked at him like he was her future, but I was watching the way his father leaned toward the officiant's table, murmuring to a man I hadn't seen before, tall, clean-shaven, and out of place in a room full of polished guests. His shoes were too practical. His watch wasn't decorative. He was waiting for something. And then, just past the second toast, I saw it. Reflected in the glass doors behind the cake, a black SUV pulled up with no markings. Another followed. Then a third. No sirens. No urgency. Just movement, clean and coordinated. I whispered, barely audible. Callisto. Green light. 2 minutes later, the air shifted. No gunshots, no shouting, just presence. 2 men stood from the third row. They didn't fit too square in the shoulders, too flat in the eyes. One reached into his jacket. Not for a weapon, for a badge. Federal. Gasps rippled through the crowd like shrapnel. Nikolai spun. His father froze mid-step. A third agent flanked the catering tent, speaking low into his collar mic. And me, I remained at the edge of it all. Colette turned in time to see the cuffs lock around Nikolai's wrists. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Only the ceremony music continued playing. Like no one had told the string quartet that the story had changed. They had Nikolai pinned against the stone fountain, his face pressed to the marble, while agents read charges loud enough for every guest to hear. Conspiracy, cyber fraud, international espionage. His boutonniere had fallen crushed beneath a black boot. He didn't resist, he just turned his head slightly, eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto me. For a moment, everything slowed. Then he spoke. Vea Tormund. It wasn't English, wasn't even Russian, not quite. It was the Kernstadt field dialect, fragmented, military-coded. No one had used that name in over a decade, and only 3 people had ever known it belonged to me. One was buried under an alias in a cemetery with no headstone. One was rotting in a NATO-controlled cell in Slovenia. And the third was now bleeding at the temple, staring at me like he'd just seen a ghost. I didn't blink. He thought I was dead. That the woman from the Baltic docks, the one who slipped away under night vision cover and never came back, was a closed chapter. But I wasn't a chapter. I was the ending. Colette screamed. She lunged toward him, heels catching in the grass veil, tangled over her shoulder. "You knew her," she shouted. "You knew her!" He didn't look at her. Only at me. I stepped forward just enough for him to hear me over the chaos. "You should have disappeared when you had the chance." He winced, as if those words hurt more than the cuffs. Then came my mother's voice behind me, shrill and cracking. "You ruined it, Dana. This was her wedding." I turned. "No," I said calmly. "What I ruined was a cover operation built on blood money." My father stood beside her, unmoving, watching Nikolai. There was no confusion in his eyes, just confirmation. He turned to me. "You knew," he said quietly, "before you even showed up." I nodded once. Since the moment I saw the capsule on his neck, he didn't speak again. Because the truth didn't need his voice, it had mine. By the time I got back to the hotel, it was already everywhere. Someone had filmed the whole thing, the arrest, the helicopters, the confusion. They caught the exact moment Nikolai was dragged across the grass, Colette screaming in her wedding gown, and me standing still at the edge of the tent, like I wasn't part of it at all. They paused the video on one frame me, adjusting my earring. A red circle. A caption, she triggered it. The internet did what it always does. Some called me unhinged. Others called me a traitor. A few turned me into a meme, the sister who shut down a wedding with one word. But in the quiet threads, the ones not written in all caps, something else surfaced. A photo. A file. A grainy shot from a 6-year-old operation in the Baltic. And there I was. Not named, not confirmed, but seen. 2 weeks later, a letter came. Cream envelope, no return address. The handwriting stopped me. Sharp, controlled. Colette. Inside just one sentence. "You were right, and I wish you hadn't been." I folded it gently and placed it in the same metal box, where I kept my old field badge and the map of Kernstadt. Not out of sentiment, out of closure. Colette didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't need it, because the truth isn't always about vindication. Sometimes it's just about holding the line, even when no one sees you. I went back to my cabin after that, back to the quiet. Jazz records, early walks, and the kind of silence that doesn't weigh you down. Justice didn't arrive on a podium that day. It arrived in a whisper, in one word spoken into an old earpiece while violins played. My name is Dana Mercer. I don't need medals. I don't need applause. I just need one thing to never stop listening. And I haven't.